In this section, we'll be organizing our application through separation of concerns. We'll start this section by decoupling tracks queue from tracks player. Next, we're going to treat each track as a separate component. After that, we'll add PubSub functionality to each track module. In last 3 videos, we'll review and implement MVC, MVP, and MVVM patterns. And we'll start with decoupling tracks queue from tracks player, so that they will act as 2 separate modules. These 2 modules will use PubSub for communication. Also, we'll use a configuration object to initialize the queue controller. But first, let's add some spacing between tracks buttons. Let's disable browser files cache for tabs with open developer tools. Okay, now our buttons look much better. We have to move tracks management into queue files. So we'll create a queue controller. It will have access to tracks collection and it will know which track is active. Also, it will render tracks collection. We'll use configuration object pattern. This meaning that the queue controller will have a set of default options. If we instantiate a queue controller without options, then default options will be used. If we'll pass an object with options, then these options will be applied over default options. By default, current track index is -1, meaning that there is no current track. Now initialize hooks, which we'll write in a minute. If autoload is active, then load data on controller initialization. If auto-render is active, then render tracks on controller initialization. If autoplay is active and we have tracks, then trigger a message that will request the player to play first track. Let's write the initHooks function. Whenever player will trigger a play message, we'll check for the track and we'll update current index. We update current index like this because we can trigger a message that will request the player to play a track, but it may not be available or it may refuse to do so. That's why we update current index only when player acknowledges us that it's playing a track. Another hook will listen for requests to play next track. Such a message can be sent by the player when it finishes playing a track or by any other module that is interested in playing next track. For now, load data function will just assign tracks collection to collection attribute. Render function will call tracksView.render with tracks collection as an argument. This way, tracksView will not depend on tracks collection anymore, and the only module responsible for tracks collection will be the queue controller. Let's update player controller by removing tracks collection dependency. Play next track function simply requests the queue to play next track. Clicking on player button checks if we have a current track. If yes, then play it. Else, request the queue to play next track. Instead of calling this controller directly, we'll trigger messages that will request player to play or to pause. The last file that has to be updated is script.js. We'll need an instance to queue controller. Even if we don't use directly player controller anymore, it still has to be initialized, just as header view. Let's increase the pause delay to 3 seconds. Okay, let's see if it still works. Nice. In next video, we'll start working towards MVC pattern by treating each track as a separate component.